Hello and welcome to session 4 of this video series on the end times with me, James Preston. This video is based on chapter 4 of my book, The Future of Great Planet Earth. If you are watching right now and you have read the book, then please won't you get in touch with me via email. My email address is in the book, or on Twitter, James Preston ZA. I'll get it straight away. I love to hear from people who are blessed and inspired by the material that I put out there. If you're a hater and you just want to hate on me, then you know what? Rather email me and do it nicely. If you just want to hate, I'll block you. All right? It's as simple as that. Okay, so in session 4, this video, we're going to have a look at premillennial dispensationalism. So that is the famous rapture theory. And we're devoting an entire video, or I'm devoting an entire video to this theory because we have to see where it came from, because we already know, most of you in the church today should know the basics of premillennial dispensationalism, but we need to know where it came from in order to understand why it's so popular and why it is causing so much fear in the church. Where does that come from? So let's have a look. Now, just a quick recap for you. We did have a look at this on a few occasions, but just a recap for you. Premillennial dispensationalists believe that the rapture is going to happen sometime in the future, where the church will be taken away from the earth, and then they'll be left on the earth, the unsaved, and a lot of Jews will be in that group as well. And in that time, there will be a great tribulation. There will be 7 years of great tribulation. There will be literally hell on earth. And then the Antichrist is going to go to Jerusalem. He's going to rebuild the temple for the Jews. The Jews are going to come back to Jerusalem, and eventually they're going to rise to power. And then Jesus will come back, and he'll start his 1,000-year millennial reign, and then we'll have the final judgment and the new heaven and the new earth. So that's the basics, that's the nuts and bolts. Whether the rapture happens before the tribulation, the middle of the tribulation, or after the tribulation, there's a little bit of debate around that. But in this study, this book, is it really this theory? The whole theory as a whole. You know, we're not even looking at post-trib, mid-trib, or pre-trib. We're looking at, is there a trib? All right, so let's have a look at this theory before we get into some of the other stuff and I get ahead of myself. Better start the clock as well. So let's have a look. Benjamin Wells Newton, remember he was in the session 3 video that you would have just seen before this. Benjamin Wells Newton was a pretty famous, I've just done the video, but I think it was a historical premillennialist, or he might have been an amillennialist, but he was good friends with a guy by the name of John Nelson Darby. They both left the Anglican Church in England in the early 1800s due to a couple of theological differences. They wanted to express a bit more freedom, and then they established the Brethren movement. A lot of us know the Brethren movement. I'm sure you've heard of the Brethren movement, and they both established the Brethren movement together. But John Nelson Darby became increasingly obsessed with dispensationalism. And as I've mentioned to you, dispensationalism are the various dispensations that God deals with humanity. Now, all theologians, all Bible scholars will agree that there are 3 primary dispensations. And that is the first dispensation, or the epoch of Adam to Abraham, right? Adam came, he fell, mankind fell, and then Abraham came, and God established a covenant with Abraham, and there was a new epoch in history, right? So Adam to Abraham. The second epoch is the epoch of Abraham to Christ. In between that, of course, was the Mosaic covenant, etc., but it was all primarily descended from Abraham. Abraham started that dispensation, and that dispensation came to a close at the resurrection and the death and the cross of Christ. Then the third epoch, which we are in right now, the epoch of the new covenant after Christ's finished work of the cross. Okay, so we're in that third dispensation right now. Now, Darby's beliefs led him to separate God's modern dealing with Israel with his dealings with the church. So Darby got to a place where he separated the two. He said, well, he took a lot of what Paul wrote in Romans chapter 9 through to chapter 11, and he sort of misconstrued it. And he basically said that God is going to deal with Israel separately to how God deals with humanity and the Gentiles now, right? And that's interesting, because God said that the two have become one, which we're going to have a look at. But it was Darby's beliefs that God was going to deal with the Jews separately to how he would deal with the Gentiles that caused him to go into this belief. Benjamin Wells Newton couldn't tolerate Darby's fanaticism any longer, and they actually parted ways. And neither at the time could the world's most famous preacher, Charles Spurgeon, who published an entire article in response to what he said had become a dangerous heresy. So very interesting. Now, Darby's views on Israel gave birth to the rapture theory. The church needed to be raptured away in order for God to fulfill his dealings with Israel. This is where Darby came up and why Darby came up with the rapture theory. And then there would be terrifying tribulation on the earth as part of God's plan to reposition Israel as a powerful nation and people on the earth. And then Christ would return with the church after 7 years. Now, there's a couple of problems with John Darby's theory. And the first thing is that God cannot deal with Israel any differently than how he deals with the church. The scriptures are full of it. Galatians 3:28, there is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male and female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus. Now again, I have said this in my session 3 video. I don't want to come across as anti-Semitic. If you are a Jew and you are watching this, please don't hear what I'm not saying. I am not anti-Semitic. I am a little bit biased against the rapture theory. I'll be honest with you. I'm just trying to be as objective as possible here. But I am a little bit biased against the rapture theory. And so I'm trying to just open people's minds to maybe look away from the rapture theory for a bit. Okay? Obviously, if I was a little bit more opinionated, which I kind of am, and I'm trying not to be, but if I was more opinionated, I'd be hammering that the rapture theory is wrong, etc., etc. So I am biased against the rapture theory. I am not biased against Jews. So if you're a Jew and you're watching this, please don't hear what I'm not saying. I am not saying that Jews are disregarded by God any longer. I'm not saying that Jews are punished or anything of the sort. I'm just saying that Christians, by the grace of God, have been included into the inheritance that the Jews had. This is a wonderful truth for Christians to believe. And so, if you're a Jew, then I hope you don't get offended by that. I hope you don't get offended by the fact that I, as a Gentile, have been brought into the wonderful inheritance that Jews have. And that's what I'm trying to portray here. And just trying to show that actually John Darby started to go down a line which is a little bit different to what we see in Scripture. So we saw there Galatians 3, Acts 15 verse 9, which is very interesting because in Acts 15 they had the council. It's known as the Council of Jerusalem. James and the apostles had a council to determine what must be done with these Gentile believers. Must these Gentile believers get circumcised? Must they follow the Jewish law? And then in verse 9 they make this incredible statement. They say, God made no distinction between us, the Jews, and them, having cleansed their hearts by faith. This is what it's all about. It's all about faith. It's not about what you do. It's not about following the law. It's about faith. Whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, it's about faith in Jesus Christ. John 10 verse 16, Jesus prophesied this would happen. He said, I have other sheep that are not of this fold. Remember, he was talking to Jews, and he says now in John 10 that there are other sheep of this fold, and I will bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. This is clearly referring to the Gentiles being included in the wonderful saving work of Jesus. Romans 10 verse 12, Paul says, "For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him." You see, the key is those who call on him. Whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, it doesn't matter. If you call on him, you are bestowed the riches of God. What a glorious truth. So, like Paul does, as I've just mentioned there, like Paul does in Romans 9 verse 4, we as Christians honor the Jews. They have an incredibly rich heritage, and one that we as Gentile believers have been included into, thanks to the uniting work of Christ. And to be honest with you, I kind of still believe there's something going on with the land of Israel, and probably when Christ returns, there'll be something to do with the land of Israel. But I don't know what it is, and I don't think it's as extreme as what John Darby and dispensationalists have come to believe. How that's going to work itself out with the land of Israel, I don't know, and it's not something I want to guess on. I think too many rapture theorists are putting a lot of emphasis on Israel. They're trying to guess, they're trying to figure it out, and actually we should be focusing on doing our job, which is to make disciples of all nations, which is basically to change the world. That's what we should be doing. Now, in history came something incredible. The Great Wars. We know from 1914 World War started right the way through to 1945 when World War II ended. There was a respite between 1918's World War I treaties and then the start of World War II in 1939. And it was in these years that the shift in hope within the church mindset began to happen. Humans were committing atrocities on scales never before experienced. Now, you need to remember that it's not that they were committing atrocities never before done. They were committing atrocities never before experienced. Why? Because the invention of the camera. The video camera had just been invented, which could record moving images. There were photographs, and obviously the moving images were displayed in cinemas around the world, and these reels would be duplicated and sent around the world, and people would watch the news in movie theaters, basically, and see what was happening a week or two earlier, and that was actually quite up to date, considering the technology. And now these journalists were filming what was going on in World War I and II. There were photographs, and people could see the disgusting things that humans were doing to each other on a widespread scale. This was a revolution in humanity's mindset. All of a sudden, they became afraid. And due to these new film and print technologies, the masses were witnessing these atrocities firsthand, and it entrenched fear in their minds. You see, suddenly the gospel's hope was replaced with a fear of the future. The church no longer knew what it believed. Very interesting little article I want to read. Comes out of a book called Longing for the End, A History of Millennialism in Western Civilization by Frederick Baumgartner, a professor of history at Virginia Polytechnic. He writes this. He says, as of August 1914, which was the start of World War I, attitudes in most of Christendom were more receptive of post-millennialism than premillennialism. Interesting. So before 1914, more people were post-millennialists than premillennialists. Most people in the West were satisfied to live in a society where the expectation of the end time largely meant a time when the human race, led by science and technology, would become perfect. But the outbreak of World War I would shatter that optimism and provide new opportunities for premillennialist prophets. In respect to millennialism, we are still living in the aftershocks of the guns of August. That is a profound, profound statement from one of the professors of history at Virginia's Polytechnic. An incredible statement which just pretty much wraps it up and sums it up, that Before World War I, most of the church believed in postmillennialism, and most of the church believed that the world was going to get better through science and technology. The world was going to get better. And then World War I came, and fear replaced it, and all of a sudden, the church just believed it was going to get worse. And these prophets started to rise up, and they started to align Gog and Magog with Russia and Ukraine and this and that, and the Roman Empire is going to come back. And they started to make these prophecies up, basically, and they have tried to align Scripture with worldwide events, which could easily be aligned with past events. Now again, there is legitimacy, there's possibility to what they're saying, but a lot of it has been misconstrued and to mean a lot of stuff that the Scriptures didn't intend to mean. So this fear that was instilled through the Great Wars fully gave birth in 1970 with a book by Hal Lindsey called The Late Great Planet Earth, and hence the name of my study and my book called The Future of Great Planet Earth, not The Late Great Planet Earth. And this book took modern events and it aligned them with ancient scriptural prophecies, and they seemed to make sense if you skimmed through them. The fact is, these prophecies are even more accurately aligned with historical calamities such as the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Lindsay's book confirmed, though, the church's worst fears. The world was getting worse and was on course for drastic destruction. You see, they just experienced World War II, and now they were entering the Vietnamese War, the War of Vietnam. And then came the Cold War, and all of a sudden the church was feeling very insecure, and Lindsay's book confirmed those insecurities. This thinking gave rise to movies like 1972's A Thief in the Night, and that spurned an entire genre of end-time media, culminating in its climax, the movies and the book series Left Behind. By this time, Western Christianity was so enraptured with dispensational premillennial viewpoints that it became the foundation of almost all charismatic churches. And if Charles Spurgeon had to come in and preach unrecognized on his viewpoint on the end times in some of the big churches in the world today, he would probably get kicked out. That's the reality. You see, if you've just recently watched the movie Left Behind with Nicolas Cage, and I love Nicolas Cage, by the way, he's such a great actor. If you've recently watched that movie, this is the climax. This movie is the climax of what happened in World War, in the Great Wars, World Wars I and II, and all the way through, it's come into mainstream media where now it sells. Because the reality is, fear sells. Fear, hype, catastrophe, calamity, these things sell. And the reality is, we are here to make the world a better place. We don't have to sit back and let fear get the better of us. Fortunately, though, it's all changing. I believe, and I can see around the world, people are rising up, and they're starting to question the rapture theory. And things are changing, and if you just go by the stats of the latest movie, the latest Left Behind movie, you can see that it's not as popular as the authors were hoping it would be. So it just goes to show people aren't as interested as this kind of viewpoint any longer. Why? I'll tell you why. Because actually, the world is experiencing peace like never before. We're in the most peaceful time in all history, and we're going to have a look at that in the very last session of this video series. You see, within only a few decades, mankind's predisposition toward fear had taken the church down a road it should never have gone. It completely shifted the church's focus off the King's saving work onto how he might return and deal with humanity's depravity. But the reality is, Jesus came to deal with humanity's depravity at the cross. He's not going to come and deal with it at his second coming or through great tribulation. He dealt with humanity's depravity at the cross, and the church should be explaining and preaching the good news of this work so that humanity's depravity can get dealt with. So that's just a little insight, little overview of historical, I keep saying historical, please excuse me. That's just a little overview of premillennial dispensationalism, and that kind of wraps up our look at the four main end time viewpoints: amillennialism, historical premillennialism, post-millennialism, and premillennial dispensationalism. Hope you've enjoyed this segment of the study. In the next study, chapter 5, we get into the book of Matthew, and we look at Matthew chapter 24, and how are we to view these scriptures if dispensational premillennialism is actually a little weak in its scriptural understanding. Then how do you really interpret Matthew chapter 24? Well, we're going to have a look at it. We're going to start interpreting Matthew chapter 24 in the next series. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one.